Welcome to the SoLoMo Show, a weekly podcast hosted by Corey O'Brien, the social media strategist at Heat and author of thefutureofads.com.
And I'm Adam Helway, CEO of the digital marketing agency Secret Sushi Creative.
Each episode, we discuss topics, trends, tactics, and tools related to social, local, and mobile marketing and advertising. Our goal is to give you the information you need to be a better marketer. Today is Tuesday, December 18th, 2012, and this is episode number 49.
In this episode, we're going to discuss a review of 2012, the mobile photo app shakeup, Facebook's new Nearby feature, the new YouTube Capture app, and much more. Hello, Corey. Face-to-face Corey instead of over the Skype Corey. How are you doing?
It is going well. Welcome back, Adam. Welcome back to the U.S. Welcome back to the Google Hangout. We are back to our old, though, despite being our old way of doing this, it actually took me a while to remember all of the setup that we had to go through. I was, trying to remember, how do I embed this thing again? How do I, get all the mics changed over and set up? So we are back in normal mode right now.
They changed things a little bit, though, too, right? They did some updates with the apps and all this, and I guess they made some updates to the Hangouts a little bit as well.
Yeah, the Google Hangout, they hid the embed code on me, and they added a new app interface, because they've got all these little apps that you can install to augment your Google Plus experience, which I've never really used, though we try to use the lower third, which gives a nice little name bar across the bottom, but that doesn't always work well. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Right now, for me, it's not. So we'll see. Obviously, still working out some of the kinks, but works for us most of the time.
And I think we were talking just before we went on the air that we're both feeling a little bit guilty that it was the first week of January that we started the SoLoMo show. And every single week, as much as we'd like to sometimes be tired at the end of the day and go relax or something like that every once in a while, instead of maybe record the show on our Tuesday, which we almost always have done every single week. At least we've recorded an episode every single week. But last week, due to the holidays and all kinds of other stuff going on, we missed a week.
Yeah, I had back-to-back holiday parties. My holiday party at work was one day and my wife's was the next, and we were recording live from Mobile Loco, which we will have some of those interviews coming up in a future episode, so that took away our Tuesday. So at the end of the week, we look back and we're like, oh, we just never found time to do it. So we did have to miss 1 week, but we are back onto our regularly scheduled program at this point. So,
and I figured instead of kind of letting that go under the rug, we had to mention it because there's going to be people actually listening to the show and going, why is this episode 49 happening? What happened to that one? Are they staggering it? Because we actually do have subscribers and listeners. So that's what happened. Please forgive us. And we are now going to move on to the show.
Diving right in, our infographic stat of the week is a number of different things that we're kind of mashing together because in the early part of December, a lot of social services and companies like to release their 2012 year in review. And so this time we actually had Twitter, Facebook, and Google all kind of reporting on their data and their usage for 2012. So we thought we'd run through a couple of these, just pick out some interesting trends, interesting highlights, but this is definitely one that you'll want to check out on your own. We're going to include links to all of these in the show notes. Those are available at solomoshow.com. So check those out because there is a ton in here. Google's especially, you can kind of click around and play with a lot of different data and compare countries. That one's exciting. Twitter, you can actually create your own sort of infographic. It'll scrape your data and put together a little story. Same goes for Facebook. Facebook has a similar tool where it'll show you some of your more popular posts and you can create kind of your own infographic. So a lot of fun stuff to play around with. But I thought maybe we just talk about some interesting things that are being covered by these year in reviews and, what they might mean for marketing and advertising.
Let's do it.
So Adam, anything that stuck out to you? Anything you wanted to call attention to right off the bat?
I mean, I think between the three of them, it's really interesting to see. I think this is the first year, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is the first year it really seems that the networks, or I guess you'd say, Google itself didn't really necessarily focus specifically on Google Plus per se, but on their search. Between Facebook, Google, and Twitter, they did they put a lot of work into displaying these things. They really made them kind of this, just like you might see on TV, the end of the year special. They really put a lot of work into producing each of these, and they've done it kind of each with their own style. So I think that's the thing that stood out the most to me, is that they really felt that this was something important to kind of, in a way, showcase the importance of what their network or their service was providing to the world via social media. So that was the thing that stood out the most to me. And with that said, if you look at something like a Twitter, obviously it's more about the tweets and so on. And they had, for instance, tweets that stood out, just individual tweets that had a lot of impact for, whether they be positive or negative impact. At the top of the list, for instance, was 4 more years, with the photo of him hugging Michelle Obama, and they showed the metrics underneath each of them, the numbers, 810,000 retweets on that particular one, 300,000 favorites. And so, and the cool thing is they also give you the controls right here to then, if you really want to join in on the fun, and also click retweet or favorite or reply directly on each of the things that they were shared, and they provide a little bit of context. So each of them have just kind of showing things off in the way that's most appropriate for their particular service or network. What stood out to you, Corey?
You're definitely spot on in that they put a lot of work into these. They're sort of telling stories with data and bringing the data to life. Google put together this really cool video that walked through the year. It sort of highlighted all these events, and I was actually going through and remembering all these things, and I was like, wow, you don't really realize how much actually happens in a single year until somebody puts it all together in a recap video. And right on top is, it says 1.2 trillion searches. So there's obviously a ton of data that they were able to pull together. When you've got 1.2 trillion bits of data, you're going to come up with a lot of interesting insights. But I thought, looking at some of the specifics, Twitter had an interesting section called Only on Twitter. And that one was more self-serving, but also just highlights, some of the really cool things that happened on Twitter. One that I wasn't aware of was, it was called A Plea for Medical Insurance. And there was a man who was battling stage 4 colon cancer and tweeted out that he was having trouble paying for it and trying to figure out, he was basically running into the limit of his insurance. So his insurance company was actually following him, found that tweet, and the CEO reached out directly to him and said, hey, look, we're here to help, and, let's talk about this and find some way that we can make this right, even if, it doesn't necessarily follow by our exact policies. So, that was definitely interesting. There was another that I hadn't even seen. It was basically Ricky Barnes, I think it is. He's a swimmer for the U.S. swim team, and actually found out that he had qualified for the 200-meter freestyle through Twitter. The Olympic coach tweeted out that he was going to be in the 200 freestyle, and all of his fans were like, oh, I just saw that you're going to be swimming it. And he actually didn't know until he was getting all of these retweets from Twitter. So I thought that was really interesting that, Twitter has sort of replaced phone calls and replaced emails in certain situations. And obviously those stand out from the norm, but still interesting to see that type of stuff emerge.
With Facebook, they also put together a place, essentially, and I don't remember exactly what the URL is, where you can go yourself and actually find out your 2012 highlights. I was a little bit disappointed because for the most part, they were really just kind of like whatever seemed to get the most action from, folks on Facebook. And so there were some things that were a little goofy in my account that were the highlights of 2012. And I didn't really consider those, say, the highlights. Whereas I'm sure that Facebook, it was a mix of both what was the most popular, but also likely curated by them by hand. If you take a look at the Google side, it's also really interesting to check out the hashtags. They say the Google Plus hashtags, and to kind of remind ourselves of what it was what were the important things that people decided that they wanted to generate hashtags for. And normally, obviously, Twitter is associated with hashtags, but in looking at this list, for instance, number 1 is SOPA. And I totally forgot about the big SOPA thing that happened, and that it was even in 2012. Hurricane Sandy, it wasn't that long ago, but to see Hurricane Sandy both in one of the top events of the year that was discussed on Twitter, as well as the hashtags, just as kind of a reminder of how much it impacted people here, especially obviously in the U.S. So it's kind of a interesting reflection point to go through these and take a look at them. And I would imagine that they would keep these open and available from years to come, where you could kind of go back and check out what were the highlights throughout each of the networks.
Yeah, Facebook did something similar. They had a memes. It was the top 10 memes on Facebook. And it was kind of interesting, even just digging into what some of these would mean. So the number one meme was TBH, which is short for to be honest. So a lot of Facebookers are, sharing their opinion. They're sharing something that maybe they're not quite sure how it's going to be received, so they have to preface it and say, to be honest, this is how I feel, though I wouldn't necessarily say that outright. And then in number 2 was YOLO, the highly controversial but very popular "you only live once." So a lot of people sharing YOLO-style comments on Facebook. And then following, running down the list a little bit, Coney, one-word comment, Gangnam Style, Cinnamon Challenge showed up there, which I'm wondering if that meant people were talking about others doing the Cinnamon Challenge, or if that was actually people reporting on their own Cinnamon Challenge and how that went down.
I think a lot of people were yelling YOLO just before doing the Cinnamon Challenge. That's what it was.
They merged together. I like that. Cray came in at number 7, Shaking My Head at number 8, Big Bird was at number 9, which was funny, all the political stuff, and then Linsanity, back when Jeremy Lin from Basketball Season was going crazy. A lot of people talking about that. That was a big story. So, it's a fun little trip down memory lane. Nothing too surprising. They're not, breaking new ground with any interesting data, but it's always just fun to poke through, see what people are talking about, see the types of conversations people like to have. Again, see things like YOLO being the number 2 most used meme on Facebook. maybe that's right for your brand, maybe it isn't, but at least it's good to know about and see if there's ways of working that into your conversation. So I would definitely encourage people to check this out. Like we said, a lot more that we aren't able to cover, but great data and interesting insights from the brands directly. All right, Adam. So next up on the list is the mobile photo shakeup. This is, again, a combination of a number of things coming together all at once, and we figured we'd mash it all up and talk about the overall results of this. So we've got Flickr adding Instagram-style filters to their mobile phone application and actually releasing a mobile phone application. I don't think they really had a modern iPhone application.
They did actually, but it sucked. I mean, it just
modern being the keyword. They had an application,
yeah, I
but
guess.
It was like, when you're competing with Instagram and Facebook, even you've got to.
That's a technical term, by the way. Sucked is a technical term, by the way.
There you go. And then alongside that, Twitter actually added photo filters to their app, and so you can again kind of augment your photography before you share it on Twitter. And then all of this culminated with Instagram changing their terms of service slightly to alter the rights that they have over your images and the ability that they have to reuse them in things like marketing and advertising. And as a result, people, up in arms, I'm quitting Instagram, screw this. It's, ever since Facebook bought it, it's been going downhill. And
the Aztecs were right. It's the end of the world.
It's the end of the world. Instagram is gone. What am I going to do? And that's all, shaken out as even today we're seeing, this is basically a live news item that is happening and changing by the hour. But figured we'd talk about this. What does it mean? What should brands be considering? Is it time to leave Instagram? Is it, time to revisit your Flickr account, dust that thing off and dig it up? What should brands be doing, or at least what should they be paying attention to in the coming weeks when it comes time to make a decision about how you're going to approach mobile photo sharing?
All right. Well, in addition to this, there's a couple other minor details that I think that folks are forgetting a little bit. With the addition of the photo filters on Twitter, it was also kind of following Twitter's move to go ahead and remove their Instagram's move to go ahead and insert their photos directly in as a partner, as a content partner with Twitter into the Twitter stream. So previously, whenever a photo was shared on the Twitter stream, you would actually see it embedded into, for instance, the mobile apps on Twitter and onto the Twitter desktop application, and people could just experience it, just kind of like you were watching, like YouTube and like a lot of other pieces of content that are on there. But it was only, I think, a few weeks ago that Instagram decided that they were going to pull away from doing that. And it kind of seemed to be in coordination with the fact that they were also making their content available on the web. So the web available profile. So before, you couldn't very easily go to, say, Instagram.com/secret sushi or Instagram.com/Nike in order to see those profiles. So there's some interesting shuffling that's going around all over the place. And everybody's kind of trying to position themselves in a proper way to take over that stuff. And then, as you said, over the last couple of days with the new terms of service, and I'm trying to find it. I think I accidentally, in kind of looking at a couple of these other things, missed out exactly where I ended up having the stuff. I think it's right here. And the thing that people were freaking out the most was this portion that said, to help us deliver interesting paid or sponsored content or promotions, you agree that a business or other entity may pay us to display your username, likeness, photos, in parentheses, along with any associated metadata, that would be like location information and such, and or actions you take in connection with paid or sponsored content or promotions without any compensation to you. Well, immediately to folks, that translated into, oh my God, my photos are going to get sold. And I didn't see it as that way. As just kind of what they're talking about, I saw that as them reiterating what Facebook has been doing for quite some time. And in fact, would kind of happen sometimes if, well, I don't think that that's working in any of the mechanics that Twitter has, because most of the sponsored tweets are from the actual brands rather than from other folks. But there's this sponsored content that happens with Facebook, where it says like, well, Corey liked X, Y, and Z. Wow, you should check it out too, Adam. And it's got Corey's photos sitting right there next to it. And they say it here as well, where they say, you agree to, let's see, may pay us to display your username. So they're not selling the content, they're not giving it away, but what they're doing is they're saying, we may pair your photos, or we may pair your name next to certain content. So say Nike themselves, you liked a photo that Nike liked, maybe they're going to say, if your friends should like Nike's photos as well, they'll show them a photo and say, this photo also Corey liked, and I'm going to look and go, oh, well, if Corey likes it, maybe I should check it out. They're not actually spelling it out and saying that this is the service we're going to be offering anytime soon, but they're alluding to it. And the language, of course, being legalese and, lawyer talk in a way, freaked a lot of people out.
Yeah, they actually addressed it in a blog post from Kevin Systrom, the CEO, or I guess at this point he's now the co-founder of Instagram because it doesn't have a CEO role. But he said, right up front, the post itself was called "Thank You and We're Listening," and basically addressing all of the feedback that was coming in. And one of the most telling sentences is, our intention in updating the terms was to communicate that we'd like to experiment with innovative advertising that feels appropriate on Instagram. And then skipping around a little bit, it says, to be clear, it is not our intention to sell your photos. We are working on updating the language and the terms to make sure this is clear. So, he's saying, hey, let's slow down a little bit. We're not trying to sell your photos. We don't even claim ownership rights. Instagram users still own their own content. We're just trying to retain the ability to use it in interesting, innovative advertising, which, like you said, a lot of that could kind of mirror Facebook, where you're promoting content. Hey, maybe if I share a photo that has hashtag Nike and I just got a new pair of shoes, Nike would want others to see that outside of my own circle of friends. They would, promote that. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily the direction they're going in, but that's one example of how a brand would want to find other third-party content and actually sponsor that. So, it'll be interesting to see how this all shakes out. There, obviously, the wording wasn't received well by the community, and at the same time, it's obvious that Instagram is listening and getting some of that feedback and saying, all right, we need to readdress, we need to be much more clear about how we intend to use it. I think one of the big challenges with this is they were trying to kind of say, in the future, we might do some interesting stuff and we want to make sure we can, so we're going to be a little bit vague. They're not actually able to give examples, which is both good and bad. It's good in that, they're still working on it, they're still ironing it out, but it's bad in that they can't say, look, here's exactly how we want to use your photos, and then people can decide, okay, that's good, or okay, that's bad. It's kind of this purposeful vagueness in the language that has led a lot of people to assume the worst instead of assuming the best.
And I think the takeaways in regards to what should be expected from this language that now, like you said, is likely going to be altered because of the uproar is two things. One, you shouldn't expect people. They're not going to sell your photos. They're going to basically display your photos in context to a message. And that message is, and when it comes to the very last portion where they say, without any compensation to you, they're stating right there, just to make sure that it doesn't happen, that nobody goes saying, well, Instagram is selling advertising and I want a piece of that. Well, by already agreeing to these terms of service, that if that photo you're talking about, Corey, where you're wearing the new pair of Nikes that's being displayed, ends up being used somehow by Nike or becomes a promoted or sponsored piece of content by Nike, that somehow you can't take a piece of that, the advertising dollars from Instagram that Nike is paying for that particular sponsored post. So I think that's the expectation here, is that, hey, you're not going to get paid for it, just like you don't get paid for any advertising that happens on Facebook, for instance. And that your content is not going to be sold. And that's why they say, well, we're not going to sell your photos. They're not going to sell the photos. They're going to sell access to having those photos be displayed in context to messaging with whomever it is that ends up paying for the advertising themselves. And there's a really good post, and I don't know if Corey, if we have this post in the show notes, but I'll share it so that way we can put it into the show notes. That really talks about it really does a good job of breaking it down. It's from The Verge, where they break it down very much so and give you an idea of, like, what is this language really completely against, and what will likely be the case, and why, what are some of the instances where it'll likely manifest itself on the network. But in addition to that, there's, of course, some of these other contenders. We talked about Twitter, and in my personal opinion, the new Twitter photo stuff with the filters is really, they've seen an uptick in those photos being created and shared. I don't necessarily see it as being a replacement, at least in its current form on Twitter. But I'm pretty excited about the new Flickr app and the possibilities of the new Flickr app. Before I get into my opinion on that, what do you think? Do you agree that it seems to be something really cool that might blossom into a really popular application finally again?
Yeah, I think in terms of browsing photos and interacting with photos, I love the update. The ability to quickly scroll through photos, check those out. That felt very cool. It felt very quick. It was an experience very similar to Instagram, and in some cases even easier. You can view a lot more photos at once. The thing that was a little weird for me is, I kind of liked that Flickr wasn't the place where a bunch of Instagram-y, overly processed mobile phone photos are being shared. I liked that when I wanted to do that, I was in Instagram, and when I wanted nicer photos, I was in Flickr. And so when I loaded up this app and was seeing some of the photos that the people I follow were sharing, two things. One, I actually disconnected my Instagram to Flickr connection. I was using that IFT service, IFFT or whatever it is.
Yeah, if that then this.
Yeah, IFTTT. I was using IFT to push Instagram photos into Flickr. And I realized that it's not really how I wanted to use it. If somebody wants to follow me on Instagram, they should follow me on Instagram. And I do take photos with a nicer camera that I was sharing on Flickr, but those were starting to get drowned out by the Instagram photos that I was sharing. And so I actually disconnected those two. And I think that, it's nice to have that separation. It's nice to have a place to go to share nicer photos. And the other thing that it made me do is reevaluate who I'm following on Flickr. And so I started to go through, and people that, used to post other types of photos that have more recently focused almost exclusively on Instagram photos or Instagram style photos, I'm unfollowing those people, and I'll track them down on Instagram and follow them there, but I don't want Flickr to just be another Instagram. I want it to be different. And so I do kind of hope that this new iPhone app doesn't muddy the waters too much. I hope there's a way of, either differentiating and saying, only show me photos from this user that weren't uploaded by the iPhone app, or, at the very least, it's going to cause me to reevaluate who I'm following and in which app and for why. So I think that there's the danger that Flickr tries to copy Instagram too closely, but at the same time, the app itself is nice. It is a nice alternative to Instagram, and the way that I use Instagram and Flickr isn't the way that everyone uses it, so I can certainly see this being a success for them, even if it doesn't match up with my own personal tastes.
Yeah, I agree with you. In kind of comparing the two, because Flickr itself it started on the web, right? So it has this big web component, and that web component actually hasn't changed. It's actually kind of like a lens of that web component being pulled through to mobile, and it's interesting to see how the experience of the web can kind of change so much and seem a little bit more social via the mobile experience that's there. And, some people are wondering, well, when is potentially the web going to go that route a little bit? And I think it will not necessarily go the full kind of, we're going to do smaller images or fluffy images with filters type stuff across the entire site. But like you said, Flickr has always kind of been the place where folks that were photography lovers would go. People who were taking full size photographs, and in fact, it was even a source of photographs for folks that might want to get royalty free images from folks who were willing to give out their images, Creative Commons, that sort of thing. The way that Flickr is moving now, I see Instagram still very much is a slimmed down, simplified experience. It's like a photo sharing app on training wheels, right? You want to jump in there, it takes you through the experience. And in fact, they've changed it up a little bit more even as of recently. But for the most part, you go through it and you say, I want to use a filter. It almost encourages you to use a filter rather than just say share an image. You have to crop that image to a very specific size. And then you can't enlarge the image at all even or explore the image once it's put on. It's whatever the size is. So if you have an image that has either a lot of detail or a lot of people in it or whatever the case is, you can't really zoom in and do much more with it. Whereas Flickr is, in a way, keeps itself still a bit at bay from the users that want something super, super simple. Although it does have filters and such, it also has some more advanced cropping tools. It has the ability to kind of leave the photo whatever size that it is that you want to have. So the images can be much, much larger and be explored and also obviously seen in much larger size on the web. You can tag people in the photos, at least on the web version. I'm trying to remember. I think you can still do that on the mobile app. And then as a photographer, you can see all of this metadata that's associated with it. So even though it is very much obviously a mobile app, it's still the site itself and the service itself originated as being one of those places where traditional photographers were uploading their photographs and still do. And so therefore, there's all this information that's very kind of technical to traditional photographers in the images and the metadata. And so hopefully that stuff doesn't get thrown away, but at the same time, it's going to kind of, I think, create this potential barrier or kind of writing line that may or may not turn the entire site into kind of like this alternative to Instagram.
Yeah, the full-size photo thing is really nice because they're basically applying the filter over the original size of the photo, and maybe people aren't realizing that Instagram is scaling it down, but even when you're viewing it on the web, the biggest you can get is less than 1,000 pixels wide, which really isn't that big, versus the actual native iPhone 5 photo is, I think it's like 8 megapixels. That's a big, big photo, and so you're getting a lot higher quality on Flickr, which if you're saving your memories or if you're taking pictures of things that you might want to print out later, it's going to be a lot more flexible when you're uploading it to Flickr versus something like Instagram. Jumping over to the Twitter app real quick, this one I feel like is the weirdest of the bunch. The Twitter app felt like a little bit of a, well, everybody else is doing it, so we should too. And the reason that I say this is it's nice being able to add the filters to your photo, but they didn't do anything else to kind of separate out photos and make it its own experience. So it seems like if along with this, they gave you the ability to just browse your Twitter stream in kind of a photo-only mode, they would basically recreate Instagram inside of Twitter, and it would be awesome. But right now, you still have to kind of weed through and find the specific photos, and it's not that hard. You know, basically, you look at something like Flipboard. That's really all Flipboard does, is goes through your entire stream and says, okay, let's pull out the links, pull out the photos, pull out the specific hashtags, and merge that all together. So from a technical standpoint, it's certainly possible, which does make me wonder if that's on the horizon. But for now, it just feels like, hey, they threw some filters in there, and away you go, call us a competitor. But I don't really see it. I don't see a lot of people using those. I think you're still going to see a lot of people either cross-posting from Flickr or from Instagram, or just kind of ignoring the photo filter or the photo sharing ability of Twitter's app altogether. Is that your experience as well, or do you think people are going to actually use the new Twitter photo filter ability?
Well, some of the early reading I did was that Twitter had started to see a little bit of an increase in folks using the photos when Instagram kind of pulled away and stopped displaying directly on Twitter. I think maybe that's some of the advanced users. I don't know if the average user goes, oh, I want to make sure that my photos are displayed directly within Twitter at all times, and therefore if Instagram's not going to do it, I'm going to look for an alternative. I think Instagram kind of has it on lock. Kind of additionally, going back to Instagram, now instead of actually displaying the full images, it just links directly to it. And this may be alluding to, and there has been an increase in what they would consider, I guess, referral traffic now from Twitter over to Instagram. And I think the interesting thing is that might be alluding to potential advertising to be done on the web version of Instagram as well, where if you're trying to draw people over to a particular photo, it's acting in a way now as a landing page that just happens to also feature the photo of whatever it is that's been shared by a particular person, or maybe even a brand in that case. So it's really interesting that it's all kind of happening at once, I'd say. I was just waiting suddenly for Facebook, even though I know Facebook owns Instagram or even Google Plus, to do something that would just kind of be really, just kind of like this battle royale of everybody all at the same time. But I don't know. I kind of, in a way, I'm really hoping to see if something happens with Flickr. And over the last, I'd say, week to 2 weeks, or however long it's been since the app has been released, I think it's been a week now. Every single time somebody that I know that isn't originally on on Flickr signs up, whether they're a friend of mine from Twitter or from Facebook, because it allows you to follow those individuals, I get a notification that tells me that this person's there, kind of like a teaser to say, well, why don't you follow them? They're somebody from another network. And usually a sign of popularity for applications or services that I sign up for and check out is when if I'm one of the first to sign up, is when I see a flood of new people signing up for the service and following me, or being notified that there's the potential that I can follow that person. And so I'm seeing a lot of people who had never signed up for Flickr now doing so. And the reason they're doing it is because there's a mobile app, not because there's a web interface for it.
So to summarize all of this, let's run through, as a business, as a brand, what you should be considering from all the news here. My take on it would be Instagram is still probably the place to go. I would keep an eye on it, but like I said, they haven't really said, here's how we want to use it. They're just kind of leaving the door open for using your images for advertising in the future. So it is something that I would keep an eye on. Even myself as a user, I was a little bit unsure of the direction they were going to take. I think that there's, if they go in the direction of something like a Tumblr, where you're promoting it, but it only gets promoted to people that are already following you, hey, that by all means, go ahead. But, there is a little bit of risk there. There is a little bit of clarification that they need to do, but Instagram, still very brand friendly, still very easy to use. It's still the same clean interface we've come to know and love. So that feels right. It still feels like something that makes a lot of sense. Flickr, I think, is interesting, but more from a user perspective. This could be my own personal use of Flickr, but it's always felt very personal and not very brand friendly. I haven't seen a lot of brands outside of photography brands, so, Nikon and Canon being the exceptions here. I haven't seen a lot of brands really get a good response out of Flickr, whether it's, posting photos and having other people subscribe to that account and like those photos and comment on those photos, or even, trying to put together campaigns and things like that. I just haven't seen it, so I don't know that Flickr suddenly having a mobile app changes that much. It might, but in my opinion, I think Flickr, great updates. I love the updates, but I love them from a user perspective. I still don't feel like that's the right network for a lot of brands to put a lot of effort in. And then Twitter, like I said, it's a nice addition, but if you were using photos on Twitter before, it just makes it a little easier. If you weren't using photos on Twitter, I don't think that the addition of filters is enough to suddenly motivate you. So, if you're a brand on Twitter sharing photos, by all means do it through this new mobile application, but not a big change, not something that I would actually change my existing behavior based on.
I agree with you on the Twitter part. I think that the Flickr part, in regards to brands using it, whether it be an effective place for them to do so, I think there's room for somebody to step up and just try it. I think that there's a big brand like a Red Bull or like a Nike or like an Adidas or somebody like that could potentially take advantage of it and not upload full resolution images. I don't think that's that's a place where that could turn into, unless they want to give away the rights to those images and people potentially download them. I think that they could do smaller resolution images and they could test out and see if they start getting a bunch of people following them. And I think a brand that's that large could likely see an increase in people following them on Flickr, and might even be able to test some really interesting experiments out to use them. To use it a little bit more. I kind of say it's almost akin to, say, SoundCloud, where SoundCloud has only barely made itself more like a social sharing platform, whereas before it was more like a content sharing platform, or place where you would archive content, and you would, not a content sharing platform, but an archive of sorts, where you would go and see a repository of what somebody's put there in regards to their music and their sounds. And some brands strategically utilizing that. I think if you really have an even more kind of, say, photographic based target market that you want to go after and resonate with, some of those brands might be able to experiment a little bit on Flickr.
All right, well, continuing the theme of big companies going after other big companies, we've got Facebook releasing a new feature called Facebook Nearby, which is sort of their take on Foursquare's new Explore feature and a lot of the ways that people use Yelp. So basically, inside of Facebook's mobile application now, you can browse things that are nearby, whether it's a restaurant, whether it's shopping, whether it's a new bar, place to grab a drink, that sort of thing. Facebook is finally putting their Gowalla purchase to good use, and bringing in some of that data, bringing in things like likes and comments and friend check-ins and that sort of thing, and trying to become the one-stop shop for location data as well. Definitely an interesting move. Definitely, putting some data, some potential uses for existing Facebook data to new uses, which I like. But what's your take on this, Adam? Do you think this is a good move from them, something brands should pay attention to, or does this feel like too little too late?
It'll sound like a load of crap from me, but I've actually been waiting for them to do something like this for 2 years. I've thought that since their mobile app came out, and I just thought that the pages, and especially anything that had location-based data associated with it, this would be an interesting way. I've always felt that when somebody's walking around, they should be, say, recommended a page, and in essence, this is kind of in a way what they're doing. They're looking at the data around their places pages and their business pages, and they're giving it a new lens directly in the app. And I'm not sure how many folks actually use Nearby before this, and it's rolling out slowly for folks. So as you look at it now, you may or may not see this already there. I looked at it a number of times today, and all I still saw was, it's showing me where my friends were in proximity to me in kind of a sequential list. But this is, I think, a pretty big deal if people use it. I mean, it really is if people use it. Yelp is got kind of a stranglehold on kind of reputation and people using it to look for businesses. I think Foursquare itself is finally, and even Food Spotting to some extent, has started to finally make their website available for discovery and search, and has made their mobile app a little bit better as well for kind of discovery and search, whereas previously it was a little bit more about adding data to what they have. But with 250 million people using the Facebook location services already, I think that this could really be a contender here for driving foot traffic. And that's before you even start adding advertising opportunities on top of this for folks.
That 250 million number, I call some shenanigans on that. I read that and I was like, I think you're Google Plusing the numbers right now and wrapping a lot of people into this that don't use Facebook location services. My guess would be that that's, if somebody like geotags a photo, that Facebook's like, oh, they're using our location service, which that's crap. My guess is the number of people that are checking into locations with Facebook is significantly lower than that.
But I'd say, let's say checking in, they're doing it because they want to show it off in their Facebook stream. Doing that is very different than using a location service to find something that you want to walk in, a place you want to walk into, for instance. You know what I mean? So if you're checking in to share your location, you say, I'm at blah, blah, blah location with Corey right now. I'd say that whether it's 250 million, I wouldn't say that wouldn't be too far off from that. Don't you think?
I don't know, maybe, but that number feels really... you got to keep in mind, Facebook just recently crossed the 1 billion users, and that's globally. That's like, countries that don't have amazing cell coverage. You're using Facebook on your feature phone. So to say that 1 in 4 people are using Facebook location services feels like a bit of a stretch. So I would love to see more data on that number. Until I do, I'm calling that number inflated, but at the same time, hey, that's a lot of data regardless of how it gets there. If people are tagging photos, if people are doing things like sharing their location or even just, sharing it inside of a status update, that's all data that Facebook can use to pull into this nearby feature. So I don't want to discredit it totally. I do understand that it adds to it. I just, I read 250 million and I was like, get out of here. That's crazy.
And the mechanics behind it is really interesting because it almost in a way mixes. I feel a little bit sorry for Yelp in a way because Yelp doesn't have the big, massive amount of data that especially Facebook, for instance, does coming in, and they've really kind of, in a way, from the start, simplified how they're ranking businesses. Right? It's like 1 to 5 stars, and that is kind of about it. Facebook is doing almost the Foursquare route, where Foursquare is giving almost like this number of 1 to 10, and in fact, they're giving it like if you want to do an 8.1 or a 5.3 or whatever for the venue, because they're using so many signals. They're using how many times this place has been checked into, how many times it's like a particular friend of yours, how many times there's been a little heart that's clicked, which is essentially their like. When you look at the mechanics behind this, they're doing a very similar thing. It's 1 out of 5 stars, which is primarily based on I'm trying to remember if those themselves are based on the recommendations that they have for locations on Facebook pages, but then it also shows, for instance, how many times it's been checked in and from which of your friends have checked in too. So they're trying to influence you by saying, hey, Corey checked into this particular place, or John and George checked into this other place. And they are providing you actionable ways of following up with these locations you might discover. You can like it. You can click a button and call it if there's a number that's actually, that's listed there. And you can just do a check-in. And of course, obviously, there's an address and everything, so you can find directions to the place, and even check out the timeline of what's been shared on that particular Facebook page. And so I think there's some really interesting dynamics at play. It's just a matter of, like you said, are people really going to use it? That's what matters.
I've said on the past, I'm a huge proponent of Foursquare's Explore feature. I love that feature. I probably open it up once or twice a week at least. So if Facebook's able to offer that type of experience, that kind of, discovery on your behalf, where it's tailoring it to some data that it knows about you and kind of intelligently recommending things, I'd be all for it. The thing that it does make me wonder, though, is Facebook doesn't have the same kind of data about me as something like Foursquare does. So I've been using Foursquare for years to check into locations. So it knows the type of food that I like to eat, the frequency that I like to go out, what I check into more often than not, what places I return to. Versus Facebook is kind of, at least initially, pulling a lot of that from the pages that I've liked and, just where I am in general and what my friends have liked, which isn't necessarily the same thing as, okay, well, you like this, saying, hey, here's a bunch of businesses that your friends liked that are in your area. Might work, but it might not. So it'll be interesting to see how accurate this feels, or if, the first couple of times you use it, it's like, oh, we recommend you go to McDonald's and Starbucks because there's a ton of them nearby and all your friends like those because they've got, tens of millions of likes on their Facebook page. That's going to be a lot less useful than saying, hey, we've, analyzed these 10 places that you checked in this month, and here's something similar that just opened up down the street, and we think you'll like it.
I think there's two different audiences there, and the difference between those two is really slim. Because I myself kind of don't really care as much about if 5 or 6 or 10 of my friends have gone to a particular place. I'd care a little bit more about what my friends say about it, if there's a recommendation or a testimonial that they have. So, for instance, when I've gone and looked on Yelp, if I see that a friend of mine has said something on Yelp, I'll tend to kind of, because I know that person, they're a close tie, I will kind of pay attention to what they have to say. And I've gone and checked out places. And in fact, I've kind of regretted that a couple times. But I think with Facebook, it's only a matter of time until they have that data that you're talking about. And initially, they are asking you, there are a number of different ways to cut up the information that gets displayed in front of you. But one of the things you can do, right, is you can see nearby, which shows you the friends, or you can go into any of these other categories, which you can also do with Foursquare as well, and as well as Yelp, nightlife, shopping, hotels, outdoor arts, restaurants, coffee, all the usual sort of thing. So I think it's really going to be more about taking a look at what the overall rating is rather than say where exactly your friends check in, and then maybe even taking a look at what socially that particular page has been sharing, maybe if they have a deal in the future, those sorts of things. But I think the difference between the scenario you're talking about on Foursquare and this is really about personal preference.
And if you're a business, we've said this over and over again, but it applies once again to this situation, make sure that your information is correct. The last thing you want is for an opportunity like this to pass you by because your address hasn't been updated or you don't even have an address on your Facebook page. So, at the very least, make sure you've got a Facebook page, make sure it's got some good-looking photos of the interior of your place, and then make sure that the contact information, the hours, the address, that's all correct, because you're really wanting people to check in on Facebook, to share that check-in, because it could eventually lead others to visit your establishment just based on the fact that their friends go there as well. So, I would say the takeaway from this would be to definitely double check, make sure your Facebook data is accurate. And then step 2 would be, find ways of encouraging people to check in. Either find the people that already check in through a service like Foursquare and say, hey, we'd love for you to share that check-in on Facebook as well. Or, do a promotion. Say, hey, show us your check-in and, drinks are on us or something like that. I would say try to get ahead of this wave. Do some things that'll get you an early bump in check-ins. And, that might put you ahead of the curve if Facebook Nearby did become a popular feature that people started to use more and more.
I agree.
All right, Adam. So, speaking of mobile apps, this feels like a very mobile show. I like it. We got a lot of mobile news. YouTube released a new capture application. Interestingly enough, YouTube did not allow you to upload mobile videos. And, a lot of people have said, what is going to be the Instagram of video? And all of these other services came out, and yet we all kind of forgot, well, hey, why doesn't YouTube just become the Instagram of video? Did you get a chance to check out the YouTube Capture app? And if so, does it feel like the future of video, or does it feel like a first step, a baby step that still has some work to go?
I really didn't get any farther than the video because I understood exactly what the app was about, and I'm still trying to decide if I want yet another application on my iOS device and what it would be used for. I'm trying to remember what other service did this, where I think it may have been like Ustream or something like that, where in the past one of these video broadcasting, live broadcasting services had an app for broadcasters and had an app for those who wanted to consume shows and actually watch other folks' content on the networks. And so it's kind of like their way of saying, this is the light application to try to increase the amount of sharing, because I think a lot of people don't even realize that the YouTube app itself has a way to record video directly on it and then upload it onto YouTube. It's a little bit of a secondary function behind consuming content and actually watching videos on YouTube on your your smartphone or your iPad or whatever the case may be. So this application was kind of like one of those, like, I'm here in the moment and I want to capture it. I wanted to I want to be able to take it out and quickly be able to access that feature, and then with just adding a few pieces of information, I can then just share it. And that really is it. There's nothing beyond it other than that. It's just kind of like a quick tool for somebody who really is fond of really capturing YouTube videos, and rather than doing it, say, from your iOS device or from whatever device you have it, and then putting it onto something to upload or clicking the share button and uploading it, you just have that app right there and make it happen.
Yeah, a couple of interesting things from this. So first is that not only does it upload to YouTube, but you can then share that video out to networks such as Twitter. So if you're a brand, you're out and about, let's say you sponsored an event or sponsored a concert and you wanted a quick way of saying, hey, Twitter fans, here's an inside sneak peek at the concert we're doing, or this, thing in the park that we've got going on, whatever. You can quickly capture a video and then share it out to other social networks. So it's not just a tool for YouTube, it's sort of using YouTube as a backend for video sharing inside of all of your social networks. So I think that there's some interesting opportunities there. The other thing that's really interesting with this app is it's enabling quick access to a lot of the back-end video optimization services that YouTube offers natively. So they do things like color correction, image stabilization, and even background music addition, all from within YouTube. So if you've ever used YouTube as a content creator before, you know that they kind of pop up little messages and say, hey, we've noticed that there's a little bit of stability issue in this video. Would you like us to clean that up for you? Or, hey, the lighting in this seems a little off. We can analyze it and automatically improve it for you. And that's something that would be very intensive to do on your phone itself. So this is actually offloading some of that processing into YouTube servers, which are powered by Google, so therefore incredibly robust. So it's enabling you to improve the videos beyond just, oh, well, this is kind of a crappy cell phone video. Suddenly, when you remove some of the image stabilization, you improve the camera lighting, and you can share it into Twitter, it becomes a much more powerful tool. So I do think that, at first glance, it feels like, oh, this is, no big deal. But digging a little deeper, I do see this as being a great tool for brands that are involved in creating and sharing videos.
And in addition, you made that comparison to, what's the great Twitter for video? Well, of course, if there's a way to quickly share YouTube videos, that's the best Twitter for video because YouTube is so widely used and kind of ubiquitous when it comes to video. People are so used to consuming YouTube videos and sharing YouTube videos and watching them, and so I think, like you said, it may be kind of an interesting tool for folks wanting to use it for short form video specifically. If you're still used to kind of producing something large, bigger spots, something a little bit more long form, and I wouldn't say viral, because even short form videos can be viral, but with a higher production value, so to speak, then you're likely going to do it right from your computer or whatever you're saying directly to YouTube and deal with it there. But like you said, you're going to do something short form and quick. Maybe you're at an event and you want to cover something and you want to get it up there. It's a really cool, lightweight way of doing it now.
All right. Well, with that, do you know what time it is?
Bum, bum, bum.
Lightning round time. All right, we got 3 stories in the lightning round. We've got our standard lightning round format. So 3 stories on the block, 60 seconds on the clock. Let's dive right in.
You rhymed. Did you hear that? You were a poet and didn't know it.
That was on purpose.
Okay, go for it.
All right, 60 seconds. Ready and go. So first up is Facebook GIFs. This is something that we talked about before, but Facebook GIFs is now available to everyone. It's free to use for all users. And so, being the dutiful host that we are, I actually dove in and used Facebook GIFs to give a gift to a friend on her birthday, because I wanted to see what the experience was like. I wanted to check it out. So far, my experience was positive. I liked it. I think the one challenge is that the gift guide is huge. There were way more gifts than I was expecting, and you're like weeding through this, and there's no way of separating out, like, where are the big brands, the Starbucks, from like, where's the local mom and pop bakery type thing. So it was a little intimidating to actually find a gift. That feels like something where they have a lot of room for improvement. But in terms of giving a gift, it was great. It was the packaging was nice. It sort of has this digital surprise where they open it up. It did take it a step above just kind of wishing somebody a happy birthday. All right, Adam, 60 seconds on the clock. What's your take on Facebook GIFs? Ready and go.
I think my experience mirrored yours. This last week sent something to somebody who was having a birthday, and I don't think it was the same person, but I wanted to test it out, and I sent somebody a gift, and I thought the experience was pretty awesome. Like, finding a gift was pretty cool. Like you said, there were a lot of items on there. There are some filters that allow you to kind of dig down a bit, but I think it might be really interesting to dig between, say, the major brands and maybe a more independent shop or something like that if you choose to do so. And I think the experience was pretty awesome. I mean, you have the choice whether you want everybody to see it or not on their timeline. And I did, and like you said, it tells you when it's been opened. It tells you when the gift's been shipped. It opens it up and lets everybody see it after the person unwrapped it. I think the overall experience is cool. I think if you're a brand, you should figure out how to submit your product or service to the gift shop. And I think it'll actually be something that takes off for people myself.
3 seconds to go, saving us from the lightning round sound. All right, next up, 60 seconds back on the clock. Ready and go. So Square introduced a very interesting update to their wallet app, which is the ability to share gift cards. Only makes sense. If you're going to have a digital wallet, you've got to have digital gift cards. So this actually allows you to gift any Square-enabled business to another Square user, or even to somebody that doesn't yet use Square. I'm sure that's their ideal use. You're sort of using this gift card to get new users into the Square system. But as with everything Square, the experience is super seamless. It's gorgeous. They've got this kind of animation as the gift card gets sent, and then when the person opens it, there's like a little digital tear thing. It's beautiful. It's gorgeous. I do think, it's cool. At the end of the day, it's sort of just giving somebody money. It's just money in a nice wrapper, because they are using it in the Square application, which, I'm not quite sure how that whole back end is gonna work out, but I like it. It seems cool. I don't know how this would compare to Passbook, but we'll have to see. All right, Adam, 60 seconds on the clock. What's your take on the Square Wallet gift cards? Ready and go.
I found it interesting that Square has been doing so much lately. The variety of services and apps and offerings that they've been putting out there is quite interesting, because what once seemed like very much a payment system is shaping up to be not only that, but also kind of in a way pioneering the digital wallet and this whole experience very much, is about kind of almost mimicking things that you might do with your wallet and tying in the experience socially of being able to give it to folks and so on. And so I haven't had a chance to really play with that much. I've been able to look at it just a little bit. I do think it's definitely probably got its strengths over Passbook, considering that Passbook, I think it sounds like the experience that you're talking about is very, very much optimized for gift cards versus what Passbook is about kind of carrying around. I don't know. I think it's got some potential. I don't really have a final say on it just yet.
All right, I agree with that. Got potential, worth keeping an eye on. All right, last story of the lightning round with 60 seconds on the clock. Ready and go. So this is a new social network from Microsoft. You've heard of it, right? Social, S-O-C-L. And don't feel bad if you haven't heard of it because it launched to little or no fanfare. This thing was like the mystery social network. It did not get a lot of coverage. It came out around the time that the new MySpace came out, and I was getting all excited. I'm like, oh man, new MySpace is kind of cool. Let's check out this social thing. And I played around with it, and I was like, I do not understand this thing. It's you're kind of like doing searches inside of Bing, and then grabbing some search results and organizing it. And it's kind of Instagram, and it's kind of Flickr, Pinteresty. It's kind of Google Plusy, but we've already got all those networks, and it doesn't really, for me, I was like, I don't get it. I don't understand where this fits into my social networking. So, congrats on Microsoft for shipping it, I guess. But in terms of, is it worth paying attention to? For me at this point, the answer is no. All right, Adam, what was your take on social? Was I totally off the boat, or do you agree with me? Ready and go.
I agree with you, quite honestly. I couldn't remember, because as being kind of the early adopters that we are, I'm pretty sure that I signed up for this initially, and I can't remember now whether I signed up and they were still saying, well, we'll let you know when we want to invite you, and somehow they ended up inviting me and I wasn't aware of it, or if it just had such a little impact when I initially tried taking it for a spin that I forgot that it actually has been public out there for a while, because when you decided to put it in the lightning round here, I thought, well, now they finally released it. And it sounds like it's been around for some time. And so I definitely don't see this as really going anywhere unless they do something really, really huge that's going to get some attention their way. I just don't see anything happening with it. I think it's going to be kind of a failure. They'll stick around for a little while, and then they'll probably close it down in a year or two.
All right, you heard it here first. Social closing down in 2013. All right, well, we covered a lot today, but as always, we would love to hear from you. If you have any questions, topic suggestions, feedback, or even if you just want to say hi, we love meeting our audience. We love getting to know you a little bit better and finding ways of customizing SoLoMo Show to better suit your needs. So if you'd like to get in touch, the easiest way would be via Twitter. Both Adam and myself can be reached at SoLoMo Show, or you can reach myself directly. I'm at Corey O'Brien.
And I'm at Secret Sushi. You can also email us, and this time I won't screw up the email, or maybe I will, but the email address for us is SoLoMo Show, SoLoMo @gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook. We have a Facebook page over there, and on Google+, as well as a number of boards on our Pinterest account, where you can find our shows that we share and some other things on there and repin them to your heart's delight.
And as always, all of the links that we discussed today, as well as links to the social channels that we just discussed, can be found in the show notes, which are viewable either at solomoshow.com or in your podcast player of choice. And I think we mentioned at the start of the show, there's a lot in there, especially this week compared to the other weeks. It's all of the links that we talk about. It's oftentimes even supplementary links that we didn't get a chance to talk about, but can further inform you about the things that we did cover. So definitely check that out. Play around with the Facebook year in review, the Google year in review. Check out some of the data. Check out some of the data visualizations they've got going there. A lot of great stuff, so check out the show notes, solomoshow.com. And with that, we will call this episode a wrap, and we hope that you come back next week for another great episode of The SoLoMo Show.
Take care.